Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This is called Reframing Mental Illness, Discussing Stigma in Third Level Education. My name is Nicola Byrne and I'm the CEO of Shine, and I'll be your host today. This webinar is part of Shine's annual Green Ribbon campaign, which aims to end mental health stigma and encourage open conversations. Today we'll be focusing on how stigma shows up in third level education and how together we can create more inclusive, recovery supportive and stigma-free campuses. So we want to raise awareness of how stigma manifests in third level education settings and highlight its impact on students. And we want this event to be a really important starting point for a conversation about how we can make a real difference in reducing stigma, and so that we can improve recovery rates and that people are more confident to seek access to supports earlier. So first of all, to tell you a little bit about Shine. So Shine was established in 1979 by a group of family members, and in our work we support individuals that lived experience of mental health difficulties or mental illness. We promote the recovery of the individual recovery, but we do that for both people with lived experience, but also for relatives and supporters of people with lived experience. And we work to remove stigma to increase recovery rates. We do this through the media, through the workplace programme and through our Green Ribbon campaign. Next slide there, please. Okay, so we do it in a number of different ways. And the three ways we describe our work is through support, advocacy and education. And in our support, I've already mentioned that we have the work that we do with people with lived experience and family members or supporters, but we do that through we've an information and support service, we offer one-to-one support, and we've groups that we offer as well. We also offer for the media, we've clinics and we have journalism fellowships. In relation to advocacy, we have the Green Ribbon campaign. We also have an ambassador program where people with lived experience speak about their own experience. We know that all the evidence and research shows that by people meeting other people who have lived experience, the stigma is reduced, and people realise that anyone can experience mental health challenges or mental illness. We also do media monitoring, and we look to the media, and we've guidance with which we work with the media around their reporting on mental health and mental illness, and we have our own mental health media awards. We have a way of putting the voice of people with lived experience at the centre of policy and research and service planning, and that's through the Voice platform and through our national group called the Reference Group, which is at the centre of national mental health policy. We also work through education, and we educate the media on responsible reporting. And we have a workplace programme which we offer the opportunity for different companies to come and work through a 6-step programme for us, which is free. And we ask you to contact us about any of these services. The information is available on our website, but if you require any further information, do contact us through the links on the website, and the website is shine.ie. We also offer specialist webinars, and we do to conduct research that's relevant to the work that we do. Next slide, please. So why wear the green ribbon? The green ribbon might seem like just a ribbon, and there's lots of different ribbons out there, but the green ribbon is really important, and you're wearing it in the month of September. Has a lot of different reasons to make it make sense for you. So the first way I'd say is for symbolism and visibility. It's a simple, meaningful symbol and a conversation starter for people to come up to you and say, why are you wearing the green ribbon? And you can say, I'm wearing the green ribbon because I want people to encourage people to have conversations about their own mental health and their experiences of mental illness. It reduces stigma because it challenges the negative perceptions and combats self-stigma. We all have our own stigma that we hold in our own ideas about what we can and cannot talk about. So it's important that we say we give the message that it's okay and it's important to have these conversations. By promoting the conversations, we encourage openness, and we build community, and we build solidarity. Also, the Green Ribbon campaign is really important in September. We supply and promote free ribbons to spark conversations. You should be able to pick them up in a number of different retail outlets and different businesses and state organisations up and down the country. So this programme is supported by the National Office for Suicide Prevention, and it aligns with strategies like Connecting for Life. And also it's really important that we turn it from a campaign into a movement, and we do this through educational outreach, events, workshops and grassroots engagement. Next slide, please. So, as part of the campaign this year, we decided to try and do things a bit differently so that would increase our reach and also make it a bit more eco-friendly. So, we decided to try these green ribbon webinars, and we've had a significant amount of interest in them, and the attendance has been really good. But if you want to watch back any of the webinars after today, all 4 of the webinars will be online, and you just have to use that QR code to access the page on our website where you can find all of the recordings. Next slide, please. So today we're joined by our first speaker is Roisin Hornby. She's the Vice President for Welfare and Equality at Dundalk IT Students' Union. Roisin is passionate about ensuring students' voices are heard and that every student feels supported and empowered during the college journey. So I just want to welcome Roisin, and I'll leave it over to you now, Roisin. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So my name is actually Roisin Hornby, and I am the Vice President of Welfare and Equality for DKIT. I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this webinar today because the Green Ribbon is a campaign that needs to be heard, and it's a conversation that really has to be had. Stigma isn't always loud or obvious, and often it's quiet and hidden in the ways services are delivered or the assumption people make. But it affects students can be huge. The effect on students can be huge. In a third level education, stigma can be shaped whether a student feels like they belong or whether they feel comfortable in asking for help, or if they decide to suffer in silence. As a student, we're constantly balancing academic pressure, financial worries, part-time jobs, social lives, and personal struggles. For many of us, often mental health plays a big role in this. And when stigma is added on top of that, it can already be difficult enough, and the stigma makes it even harder. Today, I wanted to reflect on what stigma looks like in our education system and how it impacts students, and most importantly, how we can play a role in creating a recovery supportive system, right-based and inclusive environments to everyone. Stigma doesn't just live in our attitudes, it's embedded in the structure and system that we interact with on a day-to-day. Think about policies that don't take into account the realities of living with a mental health condition. Attendance rules, deadlines, and a rigid academic procedures can cause a disadvantage to students who may be already struggling. Then there's the issue of access. Many students who want support or encourage longer or encounter longer waiting lists or limited counselling hours. The message even is undermined that it feels like your struggles aren't urgent. Sometimes stigma shows up in language too. Words like weak or dramatic or unreliable can slip into conversations, shaping how people view students and who are already struggling. These words carry weight, and they are reaffirmed silency than openness. We need a change. We need student services that are flexible, responsive, and trauma-informed, and we need policies that recognize students' dignities rather than creating barriers. And we need a culture when reaching out, and it seems strength, not weaknesses. But stigma is not experienced equally by all students. For some, it's compounded. It takes students living with both mental health challenges and addictions, or students with an intellectual disability, or someone who has a background with living in poverty or with past traumas, and that weight is carried on. Each experience adds a layer to stigma every single day, and they face it. Stigma makes people feel excluded, not only from their peers, but also from the very systems that they're supposed to support them. A one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for this. If we're serious about talking about stigma, we need to start with empathy, listening to those students and ensuring our supports reflect their realities. Every student deserves to feel their challenges are valid and understood and worth the support of everyone. I want to turn now to the role of the staff and academic management. Everyone in a higher education has a responsibility to challenge stigma, not just counsellors or wellbeing officers, but lecturers, administration, and leaders at every level. This starts with language. How we speak about student matters is so important. A passing comment from a lecturer or a tone used in email can either empower or discourage a student who's already struggling with this. Beyond language, it's about practices. We have to create opportunities, co-production where students with live experience can shape the system and design a support for them, as we build in a recovery-focused practices in our everyday work rather than threatening them as extras. Facilities and staffs have immense influence on embracing values like dignity, respect, and empowerment. They send a powerful message. Your mental health challenges do not define you. They do not limit you to what you can achieve. We can support you during it. I also want to pause here and acknowledge the staff. Supporting students' mental health while managing heavy workloads is not easy. Staff themselves often face pressure, stress, and burnouts that can create a blind spot, moments when unconscious bias or pressures make it harder to respond in the most supportive way possible. That's why reflection, practice, and supervision are so important. Creating spaces where staff can check in with themselves, explore these pressures, and be supportive in their own well-being is key. Because when staff are well, students benefit too. Stigma is less likely to creep in when people are grounded, supported, and self-aware. I want to end the note on a high. The truth is, we're making progress in national strategies like sharing the vision, are reshaping how we can talk about mental health. Campaigns like the Green Ribbon are sparking opening conversations about stigma and challenging that silence that is always there. And students themselves are leading the way, showing bravery by speaking openly about their experiences and calling for the change we need. We're also seeing more lived experiences, leadership where people have walked the path and are helping shape the policies and services. This isn't just a token involvement. It's powerful because it ensures the system we build are rooted in reality and not theory. The message here is tackling stigma isn't like is something that we have to do. It's not an added on or a nice gesture or a goodwill. It's for our students and to show that we support them and it's a good care system that we have. So what do we take away from today? That stigma is real and it exists not only in our systems but in services and culture. It's for every one of us. Student staff leaders have to play a role in breaking it down. If we challenge stigma in our daily interactions, if we make our systems more inclusive, and if we put dignity and respect at the center of everything we do, then we create a third level environment where every student has a chance to thrive. This year's theme saying step up to stamp out stigma, I believe that together we can do exactly that. Thank you so much for listening and taking the time.
Thanks, Roisin. That's really interesting. I'm thinking about all the fact that you're talking about the importance of staff as well as students and the impact one has on the other, and then that this isn't a nice to have, it's a must have to make a real difference in people's lives. So thank you so much for that. We'll come back to you later in the questions and answers session. Thank you. Next up, we have Fergal Crowley, and Fergal is the Welfare Officer with UCC Students' Union. Fergal meets students every day to support them on issues from accommodation and finance to identity and well-being. With a background in psychology, his work is all about helping students recognise their strengths and ask, what if it all goes right? So over to you, Fergal. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the lovely introduction. I suppose I'll probably be echoing quite a lot of what Roisin said, again, I guess that student union experience of like meeting with students and everything gives us a unique perspective in that kind of sense. And so again, maybe just about myself. I mean, like, again, yeah, I studied a bachelor's in applied psychology and then just finished a master's in positive and coaching psychology. And even like since stepping into this role, I feel like I've learned so much already. I feel like even though I did a lot of reflection in my educational kind of experiences and the academic side of things, I feel this role has really given me a new perspective and kind of maybe reminded me of my own privilege, maybe the way that I was already thinking about mental health. And again, so I mean, like, yeah, I guess recognizing it is so much still there. I think more than I realized originally, like the people I have coming into me every day, experiencing, the effects of stigma kind of, even though mental illness is so common, it's still so misunderstood. And there's always analogies, I think, around helping like a person who breaks their ankle, like they've broken their ankle. But when we're talking about mental health, we kind of frame things a different way. It's often saying they are depressed, and they very much like internalizing it to people, which kind of sometimes might not be helpful if we're trying to promote that more recovery kind of oriented model. But of course, like again, alongside recognizing the challenges, we also need to highlight the positives, including again, like that we can make a change and that we are a community that needs to work together to help foster resilience and well-being. I suppose particularly, again, focusing on a university setting, there's no doubt that it's not just a societal thing, that it's systemic, that it shows up in university policies and practices and the attitudes that staff have. Even on what might seem like a very progressive campus that are saying all the right things that outwardly look like the perfect place, sometimes there's a disconnect between those values and that action that's actually being taken. One example that kind of came to my mind when I was thinking about it was maybe around getting mitigation for extensions for, if you have a late assignment or exams and things like that. Often maybe lecturers might be a lot more accepting of, a physical illness kind of note, than they would be maybe treating mental health issues as almost a second class reason. And of course, it varies quite a lot in UCC, at least between different departments. So there's a bit of confusion and unfairness there, because it's not a fully standardized process. So again, because mental health is invisible, it's often kind of minimized. I also kind of find that sometimes there can be a bit of a generational gap, a bit of a cultural gap, which is no individual's fault. It is just how the world kind of moves on throughout the generations. And I think many students today have actually gotten quite a good education when it comes to mental health, and we're quite accepting of all that. We reject that old attitude of you just get on with it. But then when it comes to maybe older generations of staff, some might not feel that same way. It can definitely create a barrier for students who are trying to ask for help from lecturers and different staff. And that's, I guess, why I feel, student reps, peer ambassadors, student union people, it's so important to have them around. They create that safe, more relatable kind of point of contact. But of course, then, you need to make sure that these people are properly trained and resourced. It's great to tell people, oh, reach out to your friend, but is your friend have the necessary skills? Do they know where to send you to? Do they have an idea of how to support you? So jumping back, we need more flexible kind of accommodations in university practices as well. Sometimes a student is just burned out. One bad week can kind of drain their resilience. And we need to have a more supportive system where people are understanding of students, especially, people who are young adults, they're facing constant, overwhelming challenges. Again, I think it might be something that we touched on later, but around like intersectional kind of stigma, how stigma can kind of build up across a few different areas. One thing I know it's talked about quite a lot recently is around like neurodiversity, and a lot of staff maybe having a limited understanding of, I guess, what you call it, comorbidities of different elements of neurodiversity, especially when it's coming to affecting mental health in a negative way sometimes. Again, stigma kind of begins with that lack of understanding. So like if you imagine like I'm struggling financially and I'm neurodiverse and I'm not coping mentally, and if I don't feel safe talking to anyone about it, it's going to spiral out of control very easily. And that's the reality for some students. And that's why it's really, really important that we have that more inclusive, more informed support systems in place. So definitely, I do think there's a real onus on that professional responsibility. I think like as a college community, we really need to continuously invest in student well-being. It's great to kind of have one-off initiatives, but if it's not ongoing to meet the demand, it's not going to work out long term. I'm thinking even like in UCC, say like we have 26,000 students now, which is huge, and the numbers keep on going up and up. But maybe there's not much of advertisements, or there's just not much of a sign maybe of the supports growing all the time. And I strongly believe things like clubs and societies are a wonderful, in a sense, preventative measure. Like they're such a wonderful tool for helping people raise mental well-being. They create friendships, they build confidence in some leadership positions, and they add some structure and purpose to people's days. And again, so it really acts as this preventative way to help build up people's confidence and well-being before any crisis kind of develops. And so I guess when I'm talking about the professional responsibilities and that commitment that the university needs to show and whatnot, there's some things that they obviously can't control, things like the cost of living. They won't be able to solve that in a day. But things like cost of living definitely adds a lot of pressure, a lot of stigma around money, and exacerbates then that stigma around mental health. Because you can imagine a student who's struggling financially, they have that stigma that they're facing, that's really stressing them out. That leads on to them developing some mental issues, which is creating more stigma because they feel they can't talk about that. And so, again, while I feel the university can't solve the cost of living by themselves, they can invest in supports that we already have. Again, things like counselling services, I feel, need a lot more investment, and it kind of really varies across universities. But, I've had students come to me who feel like there's almost no point applying due to this perception that they have of these extremely long wait times, even if it's not always true, or even if sometimes people can be accommodated. And it's not because staff don't care by any means. It's because these services are underfunded and overstretched. So we just need to really invest in those services that are already there and do our best to promote new initiatives. And then I guess, again, focusing on staff, calling them to challenge stigma where they see it, give them a space to reflect and have supervision so they can safely kind of explore those unconscious biases, those systematic pressures that they've noticed, or any personal challenges. You need to create that non-judgmental environment. We need to meet people where they are and not shame them for not knowing better if they're making an effort. Because otherwise we're just creating our own other stigma then that we're placing on staff. And in a sense, it's this funny thing. I feel students sometimes forget that staff are human too. They forget that they have their own struggles, their own emotions, that they're not trained psychologists. And so helping students be aware of that as well is really important, that we're all in this support bubble, that we all need to learn and educate ourselves. And again, so like the hopeful things and like that kind of going forward, systems like peer support, I know it's been brought up across like a lot of universities. Again, having that relatable student base and student voice that you're able to turn to that maybe isn't as intimidating in that kind of sense. Doing different mental health campaigns obviously helps. Again, stuff like the Shine Ribbons. I know we give out about 4,500 of them in our freshers packs. And you do actually get to see a couple of them around campus. And it's nice, even if you don't see 4,500 of them around campus, even seeing that odd couple here and there, it makes you feel like you're at least making a small difference. I think that's so rewarding. And again, even in UCC in particular now, our Healthy Campus is only kind of just really getting started. And so it's great to see that is maybe going to help come up with new initiatives and new focuses. So having, again, those students who are a trained point of contact. And look, I often have students coming into me to talk about issues, and I'll always do my best to listen and understand and refer them to the appropriate service. But I like to try and help them reframe things as well. So one of my favorite questions to ask is, what if it all goes right? Because I find we spend so much time focusing and worrying about the negatives. And really what we need to be doing is helping to foster a more positive campus. And that starts with educating ourselves and educating others and reframing how we're viewing mental health and well-being. So again, kind of to sum it all up, I find that addressing mental health is very much in a sense like a jigsaw. If we're missing one piece, such as addressing mental health stigma, then you'll never actually get to see the full picture. And that there's no doubt that students will really thrive when they feel confident to talk about these issues. And those are a few of my thoughts anyways.
Thanks for that, Fergal. And it really is interesting when you talk about the layered effect that's needed in removing stigma and working towards people getting, access to services. I do think it's important that people realise that they can ring the likes of Shine and find out where they can be signposted to. That sometimes we read stuff in the media and we think everywhere has a 2-year or a 1-year waiting list, and that it's important to know that there are services out there to help you at the time. And the more you put off looking for services, the more often it's harder, because you've got more and more stuck or more upset or whatever, and maybe missed more college. But it also is, and listen to you talk, and being from a different generation, it's important to think about, some of your lecturers maybe never had the language to describe even issues that impact themselves. They didn't have words to put on it, on the likes of neurodiversity and all of that. And probably some of them experience their own issues around neurodiversity as well, and don't even have the opportunity to think about those because we didn't have the assessment tools to really describe or understand it. But really helpful, to talk about creating a culture is really important. So thank you for that, Fergal. We're going to move on to Sarah now, and Sarah Hughes is the mental health program manager with Aintus MacLean in Éireann, or AMLA. Is that the way AMLA? Is that how I say it, Sarah?
It is, yeah.
Great. And since 2019, Sarah's been working with students across Ireland to break down stigma and encourage help seeking both online and on campus. Sarah, you're very welcome today, and I'll hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicola, and thanks everybody for coming today. So as I said, I've been working in this role since 2019. So I've kind of gotten a pre-COVID and a post-COVID sort of view of the sector. We in AMLA conducted some research just prior to COVID, and it actually showed what I think was a very high level of self-stigma among students. Between kind of 30 and 40% of the respondents at the time had not sought any help on or off campus for their mental health, but had either severe to extremely severe levels of depression, anxiety, or stress. And so since COVID, I've been spending a lot of time on campuses. I travel all around the country with my work, going and engaging with students. And I've been kind of trying to figure out why were students not seeking help for their mental health? Like, they knew that they were having a really tough time with their mental health, but they weren't seeking help. Some of the kind of the reasons I've come up with is that, they sort of say, well, I got up out of bed this morning, so I'm clearly not in crisis. I'm not bad enough to need help. And there's also this kind of perception of, well, everybody struggles in college. What makes me any different? Why should I be the one to seek help above and beyond anybody else? And some of those then feed into, and Fergal kind of would have touched on it, about the kind of the misconceptions about the supports that are available and the purposes of the supports that are available, especially in terms of on-campus supports. There are often really long waiting lists for counselling services, particularly at peak times around exams and that. But many counselling services do also offer a triage service or alternative services that you can avail of while you're waiting for an appointment. We do know from that research as well that many students thought they needed a GP referral or a diagnosis in order to access on-campus services. And that's just simply not the case. You can be struggling with anything from exam stress to a relationship breakdown to just feeling, a bit low for no reason that you're aware of to go and access those supports. So I do think self-stigma is a really, really big issue, but there are other elements of stigma, I think, that do play a part in the higher education sector. Fergal did talk about it a little bit there in terms of the staff. We know many staff members are really, really burnt out. And there can be a bit of a cynicism, I think, that can come in, particularly when there's, when students are looking for extensions or mitigating circumstances around exams and showing up to class and stuff like that. And, I do get it up to a point. You get the occasional student who comes up and it's their 6th granny this term that's passed away and they need an extension, that kind of thing. But I do think it's important, particularly when we speak about students coming and disclosing a mental health difficulty, that we need to believe them. If we're a staff member, you need to believe a student when they say, look, can I have an extension? I'm really struggling with my mental health at the moment. I think it's important to point out in this context that we do also have students who also are staff members. Many postgrads play that dual role, and that can be a really big kind of stressor for them. They're trying to manage their own workload, their own studies, their own mental health, and support students as well. So I just kind of wanted to highlight that. And as well, there are, as the other two have already touched on, there are many different types of students nowadays. We've widened access to participation in higher education, and I think we need to widen our access to participation in mental health support services as well. We need to be aware we've many international students who are coming in. Some of those students are coming from countries where mental health is still a really taboo subject. So, we have the kind of the high level, I feel like within Ireland at this stage, we all know the phrase, it's okay to be not okay and it's okay to ask for help. That might not be as obvious to a student coming in from a country where mental health is, in some cases possibly illegal to speak about. there's also, I think, sometimes, as Fergal again touched on, misunderstanding of different groups' needs, particularly those with neurodivergence. I think sometimes there can be an assumption that a struggle that a neurodivergent student is having is due to their neurodivergence, not due to the fact that, they can also just have regular mental health struggles on top of being neurodivergent. And, there needs to be an acknowledgement that the support needs for those groups of students aren't necessarily the same. We need to acknowledge as well that for minority groups, for example, LGBTQ students, students of colour, that kind of thing, there is an importance in them being able to see themselves represented and therefore understood in support services as well. As Fergal touched on, and I'm sure as others will touch on, resourcing is a huge issue in order to be able to meet those needs in those ways. But I do think it's important to highlight the need as much as anything. In terms of what we can do to kind of challenge stigma and promote that idea of recovery and inclusion, one of the things that we've been doing in AMLE since we started kind of coming back to in-person things post-COVID is we've had a rolling campaign called the Open Up campaign. And that's the reason I go to colleges, is to kind of bring the message of this campaign. And one of the main messages I promote is when you walk up to a group of friends and you say, hey, how's it going? In Ireland, usually the response you get back is, I'm grand, I'm fine, I'm great. It's something positive, even if you're having the most worst day of your life. And I kind of challenge students, what if you were honest just in that tiny little bit of your conversation? Doesn't need to get deep, doesn't need to get into a full therapy session. You can just say, look, thanks for asking, not having a great day. Don't really want to talk about it, but yeah, just not in a great space at the moment. From my perspective, you've moved the needle a little bit. You signaled you're a safe person for talking about mental health. You've indicated that mental health is an okay thing to talk about day to day. And I would sort of see then, well, within that group of friends, if there is somebody who's struggling, now suddenly it doesn't feel like a really big deal to come to your friends and say, look, I'm having a really tough time. So that's kind of our messaging that we kind of bring. We're also really aware of making the implicit messaging explicit. Those of us that are working in students' unions, working as staff in colleges, we know the support services that are there because we're there, we're knocking around a while, we see, we know, we're informed. We need to not assume that any student is as informed as we are. So we need to kind of, this time of year is great, there's lots of information going out there, but students are getting bombarded and overloaded with that information. They're not going to hold it all in their heads. So the information needs to be repeated time and time again throughout the year. I know that the Minister for Mental Health, Mary Butler, has a saying that suicide prevention is everyone's business. And I firmly believe that stigma reduction is also everyone's business. And I do think this is reflected in the National Student Mental Health Suicide Prevention and Mental Health Framework, where it is explicitly a whole of campus approach that needs to be taken. And that's not just, students and students' unions and support staff. That's down to the security guards, to the cleaners, to everybody on campus. It is absolutely everybody's business. I do think some areas we could improve on in this is in terms of the disability supports that we provide in colleges. A lot of disability services provide extra supports for students who have mental illnesses, but many students are not aware of that. So again, making that implicit explicit. And some colleges still only accept applications through the DARE scheme if the diagnosis is confirmed by a psychiatrist, which is a barrier to many students even just getting in the door, never mind getting the supports afterwards. I think, if I was speaking directly to individual students, I would encourage people to view those around them as people and not their labels. Like if you hear that somebody has a particular diagnosis or has a particular struggle, to still view them as a human person and remember the numbers of people who are likely struggling. Like the likelihood of any of us in this call today not knowing somebody who is struggling with their mental health is virtually nil, essentially. There was a recent review into the student success policy in the Higher Education Authority. And in that, it said that mental health is the cornerstone of student success, which, I've long believed, but it's great to see written in black and white. But it kind of, there's been a couple of conversations I've been involved in recently around what is the purpose of higher education? Like, is it just to educate people or what is it? And I think really what we're getting to is it's this idea that it's to produce well-rounded, successful graduates who can go on to have a valuable input into society. But you can't do that if your experience in college has damaged your mental health, or if, as a young adult, you haven't been supported and given the space to learn how to develop skills such as resilience, emotional regulation, help-seeking skills, all that kind of stuff. If one of the things that we're really leaning into in our kind of outreach work at the moment is encouraging those who aren't struggling with their mental health to get more informed so that you can be a good friend. So get suicide prevention trained, get informed yourself of where the student counselling service is, so that if you have a friend who's struggling, you know, they might not have the capacity to pick up the phone or to send the email to make the counselling appointment, but maybe you as a friend could say, hey, why don't I walk you over? Why don't I sit beside you while you send the email or make the call? I do think we could have more staff including information in lectures, you know, to keep that information getting out all the time. It can be as simple as a slide at the end of a lecture, something in your syllabus, something like that. Um, Again, as Fergal touched on, it's been great to be helping to facilitate getting the green ribbons out in all the freshers packs. This is the most I've ever seen go out onto campuses, which has been amazing. And I think, as Fergal said, having that visible, even beyond the end of September, like we hand them out in our packs throughout the year. And I think it's really important to have that visibility, indicate that you're a safe person to talk to about mental health. In terms of what we can do on a wider level, I do think it's important to remember constantly that different students have different risk factors for mental health issues. And as there's a lot of kind of policies around in this area that are kind of being revised and redeveloped at the moment, we need to remember that from a policy perspective as we move forward. As it's already been touched on, I do think it's important to remember that higher education institutions are workplaces too. And I do think more needs to be done to ensure that staff mental health is supported and protected. I think, you know, a lot of colleges have an employee assistance program, and that can be great, but that's not always enough. And sometimes that can be a bit of a tick box sort of situation. And we need to see colleges providing compassionate management and viewing staff as people as much as viewing students as people. And I think it's important for staff to mind their mental health and support their own peers in the same way that we encourage students to do so as well. To finish, what I will say is that, you know, Aontas MacLean and Erin, we are the students' union. So one of the kind of the main things that my colleagues on the representative side do is they're constantly pushing for better funding, for better services, lobbying government to kind of improve things in this area. And we will continue to do that, working with our partners in the area. And we will continue to I will continue to go to campuses, so will my colleagues, to reach more students and to kind of work to break down stigma as much as we can.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. It's really interesting to hear that you can see it, because we're feeling it year on year, that the awareness around the green ribbon and the conversations around mental health and mental illness is changing and improving, and it's more moving in the direction of becoming a social movement. And it's great to see that it's happening on the campuses as well. So thank you so much for that. It's really helpful and insightful. So finally, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Sean O'Connell. He's the head of student mental health and counselling in DKIT. Sean is also chairperson of PCHEI and sits on several national groups shaping mental health policy. He brings over a decade of experience in counselling and wellbeing in higher education. So Sean, you're very welcome to the conversation. Thank you.
Hi guys, thanks Nicola. So just double checking because my laptop was a bit screwy sometimes. You can still hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect, thanks. So just thanks for the invite as well. And it's just I feel very privileged in this position, because just hearing the different perspectives is really great. I was scribbling down a few notes just to add to mine as well, so I feel like I'm kind of cheating. So thank you for the comments. But first, I just want to comment on, or I suppose I'll join Fergal in the positive psychology piece in terms of when we look at stigma in terms of mental health. I'll kind of quote the positive psychology founder, Seligman, who said that things are good, but they're not good enough. So we still have a good bit to go. Yes, we are in need of more clinicians. Otherwise, we're seen as, I suppose, within student counselling, we're seen probably traditionally a lot more like a reactive service to crisis. And then, as has been noted, that will increase kind of wait times and the like. And unfortunately, yes, there is that kind of narrative within public service as well that you'll be years waiting. But what I would say is that we're not the same in student counselling, that you can be seen much sooner. For example, in DKIT, you can be seen immediately if there's a crisis, or you can start your therapy within the next week or two. So, you know, if we can challenge that bit in terms of help-seeking behaviour, I would be saying just reach out. And not let that thought kind of intervene. I know it's difficult to separate out from it, but just try and seek help where you can. And what we would say to a lot of people in terms of reducing stigma is, if you're unsure about making that kind of, let's say, head-on contact with student counselling, we've created within Peachey and within Dundalk and on a national level, obviously, we've looked at ways of reducing that kind of stress. So there's a lot of programs that are online only where you can be anonymous, and there's programs, there's online or phone line calls in the late hours. So there's that kind of additional support, and some students might opt to do a bit of that before then they decide on going into some psychotherapy or counselling with themselves. Just to note, as Sarah indicated, there is, I suppose, a byproduct when it comes to attending mental health, and we've been talking to staff about this as well as students. But we know from the research, if you are engaging in mental health services, it will improve your grades, it'll improve your activity, it'll improve your employment opportunities. So we know that that's there. It's just, again, that's why talks like this are brilliant, because it's about addressing that. And if you have a concern about your mental health, as well as a concern about the academic piece, you know, this could be an add-on that will benefit you. And just thinking about furthering developments and the awareness around that, I think this was alluded to by Sarah as well, but it's important that everybody does have their mental health policy, especially one that looks at urgent or crisis situations. From what I hear, sometimes that isn't done, or it isn't done in the workplace. We'll always have a first aid protocol and fire. You know, when we go into auditoriums and lectures, you'll be like, right, there's the fire exit and whatnot. But we don't necessarily do as much when it comes to mental health. We are working on it though. So, for example, DKIT will have a pack coming out, and you know, we'll have it coming up to Mental Health Week, which will be starting the 6th of October, and that pack will allow lecturers to signpost to students the additional services. We'll have flow charts for staff in terms of what to do in terms of emergencies, and we'll be advertising kind of further training as well. So we're trying to gather that and do that upstream piece so that we can reduce that stigma as well. Something that has been mentioned already as well is in terms of the deadline. So I think I would like to think gone are the days of those kind of strict deadlines, but I do know some maybe academics will insist on that. But we do need to be flexible, and that will more often than not be held within your mental health policy. So we're looking at, you know, there's much more challenges for students nowadays. It's increasing, and particularly around trauma as well. So if we can be flexible with that, as I said in the research, there's going to be better outcomes also for the staff as well, in terms of having a healthier classroom as well. Roisin said this earlier as well. So like the flexibility from staff, all staff, it's a whole campus approach. So the tiniest moments of contact, so a familiar face, a smile, a checking in, hey, you all right? Or do you know where to go? Those small things can have a massive impact as well in terms of the students' mental health. I was in one organization before in third level, and we were looking at all staff, everything from an academic to professional support services to caretaking to cafeteria staff. Everybody does have a place in terms of minding the student mental health, our own mental health, and our friends and family's mental health. So I just want to mention one or two points that people may not be aware of. We're working on it in terms of PCHEI. But for us, we are ensuring that clinicians are available as possible as part of an embedded service. We understand that some services don't have an embedded service. So a department, they might parachute in a clinician every now and again. So we're working on supporting them to make sure that every campus has good enough supports. And when we have enough staff, we do see a knock-on effect, and we've been telling the HEA this. So when there's enough staff, we will also see more staff, you know, kind of branching out and doing workshops, doing further training, linking in further for the communities such as Shine, and bringing people more locally in as well. So it's a win-win-win when this happens, and it's a relatively small cost. we're very, in terms of PC and student counselling nationally, we are very proud of initiatives that have been going on. So one initiative that we're very proud of is training staff and peer support students and whatnot, and the student union in a program that we call Responding to Students in Distress and at Risk. And it's a very quick and easy training to do, and it'll usually run a few times in the year. And it'll really benefit staff in terms of reducing that anxiety over like, I don't know what to do. How do I address stigma? How do I address mental health issues? Where do I signpost them? And so if you're on this and you haven't seen that, I'd definitely be directing you towards the student counselling service for that. Some issues that we are looking at the moment is in terms of jobs. It can be difficult to ensure that national initiatives are coordinated. So like we have our usual jobs and then we volunteer on top of that to make sure that there's a national collaboration for certain projects. And so we are looking for the HEA to hear webinars like this and to link with us even further, to even have a coordinator for us so that we can look at things that activate mental health issues even more. So particular trauma issues, we're looking at building trauma aware campuses, and we're looking at pornography addiction, we're looking at intervention type programs that support minority groups and more diverse students as well. So in a way, we're trying to talk the talk, but walking the walk is sometimes a little bit more difficult without coordination as an add-on to that. So it's really about that upstream thinking. Going forward, I'd like to collaborate more. I'd like to see even more research and more case studies around mental health. And Pishi is very keen on that, and especially around looking at mental health and stigma. And just, I suppose, a more positive thing as well is that I would like to note that sometimes when students come in, like they may not know about the services, even though we do run our campaigns, our posters, get lectures to talk about it. The student union is heavily involved as well. But what we do notice in our database is even if they don't know that they have been referred or suggested to come to us by their peers, by their friends, which I think is really lovely from a stigma reduction perspective. But I might stop there and we look at some questions.
Thanks for that, Sean. It's really interesting to hear you talking about the different ways that you can reach out for help. Just to mention to people, the HSE actually has an excellent website called yourmentalhealth.ie, and you can actually do a free mental health plan up on it, and you can find information about services there, just while I remember to say that. So we have a number of questions coming in, but I want to start out by asking the panel. We know that stigma just doesn't affect individuals. It's also embedded in systems and culture. And everybody's mentioned that or touched on that, and there are different pieces that they've had to say. From each of your perspective, what's one small but powerful change that third level institutions could make right now to reduce stigma for students? Before I start that, Sean, one of the other questioners has asked, can you put in around the information on the training you mentioned for responding to stress? So if you could put that link in, that would be great.
Yes.
But I'll start with Roisin to give you a chance to do that, Sean, and I'll come to you last. So Roisin, what do you think would be one small step? Have we
Sorry,
lost?
Nicola, Roisin's gone. She left at 1.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so we'll move on then to Fergal.
Yeah. I suppose one thing I talked about a little bit earlier was around like the mitigation policies and things like that. And I think that's up to each university to formalize themselves kind of. But even going even smaller than that, I think just having small things around campus, again, making things very visible, very, very easily, whether it's like, something written on a chalkboard to having a couple of posters up inside cafes and different things like that. Things that are extremely simple to do, but maybe aren't done enough. Again, that I guess constant reminder that these things are okay to talk about, and that kind of every time you look up that there's some support kind of in front of you. And that's, again, one of those super simple changes that any kind of group could do. It doesn't have to be a university leading out on it. It could be as small as a society, or it could be as big as a union or something doing those changes.
Okay. And Sarah, for you, what do you think the one small thing could be?
So look, a lot of the times when I'm on campuses, I'm invited as part of kind of either around this time of year as part of Freshers Week, or there's some sort of mental health week or wellbeing week going on, and the Students' Union will invite me along as possible as part of that. And I think it's great that that's a student-led thing and a student union-led thing. But I think it would be really great to see more staff in, like, not just engaging in terms of walking down the corridor and having a look at the stands, but if they were involved from the planning right up to having stands, if senior management could be visible on those days. I like oftentimes I do see the counselling service has a stand right next to me, and they're there as well. And I understand that that's not always possible given workloads and stuff, but I do think more could be done in terms of having staff available and visible and involved in those kind of events.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Sean, for you, what do you think would be one small thing?
Yeah, actually, just quickly, I can't put a message into the chat bar. I
Okay,
think it was
awesome.
turned up, but just for the person that was asking, if you just email info@pchei.ie, or if you're on campus, your local student counselling service will have information on that. But in terms of one change, if I had a magic wand, I would say that I'd love, if possible, kind of mandatory training, or as close as we can get to mandatory training. Pishi has been reviewing this, but like, you know, it will go against what we've been talking about, goes against our consent framework. And so we can't force people into this, but we do know that there's huge benefits in terms of mandatory training or training around reducing mental health stigma and knowing where to go if there is an emergency. So if something like that could be embedded, then I think that would have a huge knock-on effect.
Great, yeah, that's great. It's really about creating a culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's so important. So think we have time for one more question. I'm just conscious of the people giving up their lunch break. So the last question I want to ask you is, the theme of this year's Green Ribbon campaign is Step Up to Stamp Out Stigma. So what gives you hope that change is happening, and what role do you see students and staff playing together in that change? Before you answer the question, just wanted to say, I forgot to say earlier, our workplace program, I'm aware that all these colleges and universities are workplaces. We have a free 6-step program where we can work with the staff to create a much more positive environment around conversations around mental health and increasing recovery. And as part of that, we work with the staff and the HR departments to create a mental health policy that was mentioned earlier. So if I can come to you first, Sarah. So what role do you see students and staff playing together in making the change?
Honestly, I think it comes down to conversations, everyday, simple conversations. Like oftentimes the conversations around mental health only happen at the extreme end of the scale when unfortunately we have a suicide or we have a student or a staff member who's in crisis. And it's great that those conversations happen then, but they should also be happening way back down the line, like in the everyday conversations.
Yes.
And that's what I think it's kind of why we centered our campaign around that kind of idea of just generally opening up.
Yes.
You know, if we bring mental health more into everyday conversations, it stops being a stigmatized thing. It stops being a taboo thing. It starts becoming something that we naturally figure into policy making, into planning, into, as you say, Sean, embedding things into curricula and that kind of thing. And it builds confidence in our ability to be able to support not just ourselves, but our peers in times of need.
Great. Thanks for that, Sarah. Fergal, have you anything to add to what Sarah's to say?
Yeah, I mean, like definitely, I fully agree around that idea of it's about having conversations, and the fact that even we're having this conversation now today, and that these conversations kind of do happen is such a positive kind of note. And I guess as well as that, I mean, like kind of touching back to what we said before about how third level is, you know, part of personal development as much as it is academic development. I again focusing on like helping people to become, you know, well-rounded individuals, help them to be able to thrive kind of going forward, that university is a place to really grow and become the best possible version of yourself. And so I guess like, yeah, just like that idea and that being kept close to the values of university and what kind of we're investing in and what supports we're putting in place. That gives me hope.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Fergal. And Sean?
Yeah, I think well said. The only thing I can add, just thinking about hope, is that from our national data and indeed local data within Dundalk, we can see that students are reaching out even more. So this is what I meant earlier by that there is a reduction in stigma to some extent. So people are reaching out. There is help seeking behaviours. People are trying to engage a little bit more, but of course there's a ton more to do in terms of getting people in, making them aware of services, and like it has been said, that it becomes part of our everyday dialogue, and it becomes unthought of, as in it doesn't require a worry or a concern. It just is within our vocabulary already. So thanks to Shine for that as well.
Great, thank you, Sean. And just somebody said along the webinar today, which I thought was a really interesting and helpful statement, is that if you look after your mental health, your grades improve, you know, that your outcomes get better. So there is a great motivation to actually have these conversations because it has better outcomes. So today we've heard that stigma in third level education is real, but it's not inevitable. It shows up in systems, services, culture, and sometimes even in ourselves, but it can be challenged. And students, staff, and institutions all have a role to play in making campuses places where dignity, respect, and recovery are at the heart of the student experience. So as part of our campaign, our Green Ribbon campaign in Shine, and the theme of Step Up to Stamp Out Stigma, we've been looking at the power and the responsibility each one of us has to challenge stigma wherever we see it, and whether that's in the classroom or in our peer groups or in college services. So my ask today is that we leave with a commitment to take that first step, to speak openly, to listen compassionately, and work together to make third level education a place where every student feels safe, supported, and included. So thanks again for being part of this discussion, and please keep the conversation going, not just for this month, but for all year round. Thank you for today. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.